My parents were abroad at the time of the following incident. I was involved in an act of violence and I was sectioned. The only person I informed about the hospital I was incarcerated in was my brother Nicky, who always came to the rescue whenever I was in trouble. I do miss him. There were 2 bent psychiatrists involved, although my GP, who was basically in charge of the psychiatrists, was called Dr. Karl-Heinz Goldman. Dr. Goldman was an exceptionally good-looking man who spoke with a guttural Leipzig accent. Secretly, he despised the 2 psychiatrists, one of whom was giving me electric shock treatments, which could have damaged my brain. Bob assumed that Goldman himself was responsible for my incarceration in the hospital, and also for the exceptionally dangerous treatment which I was receiving. Nicky had given Bob the address of Goldman's Upper Wimpole Street consulting rooms. What's that now? I'll have to get the magnifying glass again. Oh yes, Bob, who was always compulsive, to say the least, stormed into Goldman's consulting room while he had a female patient with him. The patient was half naked and was lying on his leather-studded couch. Goldman, who had a terrible temper, shouted, "Get out of my consulting room, you crook!" Bob replied, "You are killing Eleanor Mary, you quack." I heard about the row between the 2 men from Nicky. I was falling all over the room, I was laughing so much. I had once been in love with Goldman. He was moody, passionate, and melancholy. He was also a compulsively randy rake about town. When I was much younger, I blotted my copybook in Goldman's consulting room. I saw a new receptionist there. I was feeling in a very disinhibited mood one morning. I went up to her and said, "My God, that man Goldman is attractive. He must come like the vulgar." The receptionist was furious. She said, "Kindly keep your opinions to yourself and wait in the waiting room if you don't mind." I said to Goldman's secretary, "Who is that disagreeable new receptionist? Is she an agency temp?" "No," replied the secretary. "She is Dr. Goldman's wife." Anyway, to get back to the 2 bent psychiatrists, there was in fact only one who was treating me at the time, as I said. His name was Morgan Whitteridge, and he always put his pleasures before his duties. He was grossly irresponsible and grossly crooked. He gave me totally lethal electric shock treatments, and the more often he gave me a treatment, the more mentally ill I became. I was quite healthy before he started on me. After 10 treatments, I had become catatonic. Later, I was so embittered that I rang him up and I threatened to kill him. One morning, Bob stormed into the operating theatre in which Whitteridge was practicing. He had just switched on the electric current. Bob shouted, "Turn that fucking machine off." Whitteridge was so dumbfounded that he did just that. Bob told me to get dressed and ushered me into his Rolls Royce, which was driven by an amiable driver called Mr. Hoppet, who had worked for Bob for many years. Bob ordered Hoppet to drive faster. He hit him on the head with a rolled-up copy of the Financial Times. "Oh, just spotting a fly, Hoppet," he said. Hoppet was pulled into the side of the road for speeding by the police. Bob told his bemused driver to get out of the Rolls, then he scrambled into the driving seat and drove the Rolls himself. He drove to Headington Hill Hall, where Betty was waiting for him. "What's going on?" she asked. I said, "I'd been incarcerated in hospital." Bob told psychiatrists to turn off electric current. "Why aren't you using the definite article?" asked Bob. Suddenly, he received a phone call from Rome. It was quite a long call, at the end of which I asked, "What's going on in Rome?" "Rome stands where Rome stood, on the Tiber," replied Bob. Nicky came to dinner that evening. There was a lot of life and laughter at the table. Eventually, I regained my health and got back to normal. Bob asked me to work for him in his North Bucks constituency. I was very happy to oblige. I was working for Labour, but on polling day I took a train to London and voted Tory in my own constituency, which was Westminster. I did this in subsequent general election campaigns. I continued to vote Tory on polling days, and in the evenings I drove Labour Party supporters to the polls in my late brother Adrian's car. I think I mentioned this before, but never mind. He was furious when he found out. There has always been a bit of Jekyll and Hyde in my personality. When Labour lost the election in 1970, Bob was very upset. I was driven round his constituency in his Labour Party van. A man I liked very much was driving the van. His name was Chris Brown. Another man I liked very much was called Arthur Leary. He was white-haired and had something to do with a trade union. I sat in front between Chris and Arthur. Occasionally, Chris wound down his window and shouted, "Let it drop in and pull the chain." Bob sat in the back seat. He kept standing up and sitting down. Occasionally, he called through the roof, "We have lost a battle, but not the war." He held himself steady by holding on to my hair. This gave me a fantastic buzz. After that, Bob drove to Headington Hill Hall from Wharf House, where he, myself, Betty, and his personal secretary, Jean Badley, had been living during the campaign. I was alone in the van with Bob. Although tragically he had just lost his seat, he listened patiently to me while I burdened him with my problems. When I am slightly nervous, I tend to shout at the top of my voice. Eventually he said mildly, "Will you stop shouting, please? You've been shouting ever since you got into this van." My problems were not anything like as serious as his problems. Firstly, with the exception of two of his sisters, his entire family had been gassed by the Germans during World War II. He had to get out of Czechoslovakia on his own. That's where he had been born. He won the MC for bravery on the battlefield. His eldest son, Michael, had been so seriously injured during a car crash that he had been on a life support machine for many years. Also, his daughter, Karine, had died of leukemia. My problems, on the other hand, were menial. I had been obsessed by whether or not I should resign from the Communist Party, with which I had become disillusioned. This caused me a lot of melancholia. I was like a priest who had lost his faith. Also, I had been obsessed by fatalistic tones in pre-revolutionary Russian literature. I have inherited my taste for the macabre from my maternal grandmother, who attended the trial of Crippen when his wife's chopped-up remains were being passed round the jury. Her husband, F.E. Smith, my grandfather that is, was defending Crippen's mistress and was furious with his wife when he got home. I told Bob that my favourite Russian novel was Max Gorky's novel Foma Gordeev, and that it was very morbid in places. It had described Foma's father's death in considerable detail, and also the details of Foma's father's funeral. At the age of 16, I had been very disturbed by this book. "Why did a book like that hit you so hard?" asked Bob. As I see it now, Foma Gordeev is a confused, repetitive, rambling book about barges combing the Volga in late 19th century Russia and the rowdy behaviour of people aboard them. Looking back on it, Foma, the book's main character, really is a most awful drip who cannot relate to other people and who continuously passes remarks such as, "I'm afraid I haven't really got used to life yet." He bumbles about boozing and attacking members of his own class, and for want of better words, is a shambling pain in the butt. Perhaps the book haunted and obsessed me because of its rich language, vibrant and exceptionally morbid tones, as well as its actually coming alive, regardless of Foma's effete nihilism. The book haunted and tormented me, I said to Bob. It haunted you. Why did it haunt you? He asked. Foma is the son of a wealthy barge owner. What was that noise? I heard a noise.
Yeah, it was in an email coming.
Oh, okay, fine. I'll start that sentence again. It haunted you. Why did it haunt you? Asked Bob. And I said, Foma is the son of a wealthy barge owner who dies in very morbid circumstances in front of his son. He dies suddenly at an outdoor table shaded by apple trees. Will you please stop shouting, repeated Bob. I've spoken to you about this before. Oh, sorry, Bob. As I was saying, he was drinking tea out of a glass, and when the wind blew, a few apples fell into his tea. I'm absolutely riveted, said Bob. Go on. Well, I said, well, the boy. What boy? Asked Bob. I said, Foma, that is. He turns into a permanently intoxicated wreck and uses the most wonderful language when addressing his colleagues. Even hell is too good a place for swine like you. Not in clean flames, but in sizzling dung ought you to be scorched, tormented for centuries on end. In the end, the members of his audience tie him up and send for his godfather. Blimey, when the hell's this story going to end? Asked Bob. I said, you remind me very much of my maternal grandfather, F.E. Smith, who died in 1930. He was a barrister, a wit, and later became Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for India. Once he was in a restaurant, accompanied by a man who told him an interminable anecdote. F.E. Smith called for a waiter and said, Waiter, will you listen to the end of this gentleman's story, please? Bob laughed. I can see F.E. Smith's point, he said. I continued. The book's ending is something of an anticlimax. Foma wanders drunkenly about saying he's a prophet, and someone bumping into him in the street says, Ha ha, a prophet indeed. Is that it? Asked Bob, hopefully. Yes, that's it. That's the last sentence in the book. I had a morbid fascination for Russian literature at the time, and indeed for anything connected with Russia and morbidity. I continued. My housemistress called me into her study one night and said, It has been brought to my attention that you sing the Russian national anthem in your bath. Bob swerved in order to avoid a pedestrian. Did you sing the Russian national anthem in your bath? He asked, his tone confused and totally baffled. Yes, I did, I said, adding, Oh, I forgot to tell you. The father went into the son's room and told him he was about to die. Whose bloody father? Asked Bob impatiently. Foma Gordeev's father. And then he said, You're talking very fast and very loudly, and you seem to be preoccupied with death. I think you lost someone you loved very much. Is that what happened? Asked Bob. No. I think I know why that book disturbed you. I read it. You certainly don't advertise it very interestedly. What upset you was its profound purity. You loved the book so much that I bet you read it over and over again. Each time you read it, you found more beauty and purity in it than the time before. So much beauty and purity did you see that life itself disappointed you. It became sad, lonely, and humdrum. You're rather a lonely person, aren't you? Sometimes I am, not always, I said. You came out of yourself when you were working for me. Everyone loved you being there. I think you spend too much time on your own. I know what loneliness is like. I'm going to write a book about it one day, said Bob. I think it's time you got married. I can't remember the rest of the conversation in the van going back to Headington Hill Hall. Bob was a very strict father. He had 7 living children. The youngest was a girl called Ghislaine, whom he spoiled and who was exceptionally naughty. He believed strongly in corporal punishment. He beat all his children, even Ghislaine. This caused me to be fascinated by the works of the Marquis de Sade, which are mainly about flagellation. Once I gained my driving license at a later date, Ghislaine continued to be very cheeky. She said to me, "When you drive, Daddy says you're not to play Beethoven's Ode to Joy because he says you have a lot of accidents, drive far too fast, and deliberately crash into the backs of other cars when you listen to it. Otherwise," he says, "you're not too bad a driver." The only time I drove into the car in front of me while listening to the Ode to Joy was when my terrified passenger was Robert Maxwell's cook. Incidentally, Ghislaine said, "Will you take me out for a ride in your car, provided you don't listen to Beethoven, because that would cause me to end up in a ditch?" To which I replied, "I'll throw you into a manure heap if you don't stop being so damned impertinent." There is one more thing that I will mention concerning my visits to Headington Hill Hall. Christine Maxwell, Isabel's twin, was getting married, and the reception took place at Headington Hill Hall. And Bob was sitting with Peter Shaw. I put my hand on Bob's shoulder to say goodbye to him, and he got up and said goodbye, and then he told Peter Shaw that I was the daughter of Lord Hartwell, as well as my having joined the Communist Party, taught myself Russian, and gone to Russia alone without telling my parents. And then Peter Shaw said, "Come on, Bob, you can do better than introduce me to the daughter of a shit like that." And I was absolutely livid, as you can imagine, and I sneered at him. But that wasn't all I did. I worked out a plan of revenge, and it took 2 years to find out exactly how Peter Shaw ticked and what his family was like and what his house was like and where it was and all those things. And I took my revenge, but what I did to him was so proverbially unpleasant that I will not account for it for fear of losing my friends and my family. There is one more thing about Bob that I haven't told you, and it's very, very important, and I'm surprised I haven't mentioned it before. He had one exceptionally guilty secret, and that wasn't anything to do with his business, encyclopedias, pension funds, or any of that. His secret was that he was absolutely terrified of his father. and his father looked a pretty terrifying man. He had mad, staring black eyes, I think they were, and a long, pointed beard. And he wasn't the sort of person that one would like to see at the head of one's bed during the night. In fact, the father was very abusive towards the son. On one occasion, he rubbed his face into his own vomit. His father was called Michael Hoch, H-O-C-H. However, Bob absolutely adored his mother and worshipped the ground she walked on. Her name was Hannah Hoch. Hannah Hoch was a very, very nice-looking woman. She was not beautiful, but she looked extremely serene, not unlike the Mona Lisa. I could go on and on indefinitely about Bob and his family. I have already written books about this subject. I recommend you to read Captain Bob and Me. Unfortunately, I have to admit that this book contains a lot of hyperbole and sexual innuendo. Betty was very upset by this. I took her some flowers and tried to excuse myself. I said, "I'm terribly sorry, my pen got out of control." Nicky, my brother, laughed uproariously. This was the last time I ever saw him. I have written 2 books about Robert Maxwell so far. One is called Robert Maxwell as I Knew Him, and the other is called Captain Bob and Me. However, Betty, the widow, was very, very upset by the ribald and sexual fantasies expressed in these books. So I am now writing a 3rd book about him, which is called My Unique Relationship with Robert Maxwell, The Truth at Last, because I think I owe it to her, as she was so upset. I had to say to her, "I'm terribly, terribly sorry, but my pen got out of control." Do enjoy your read.